A very good morning to the students of Euro School Airoli. Today we are going to study the extremist period, which was from the year 1905 to 1920. Students, the closing years of the 19th century and the early years of the 20th century witnessed the emergence of a new and younger group within the Indian National Congress, which was sharply critical of the ideologies and methods of old leadership. These angry young men advocated the adoption of Swaraj as the goal of the Congress to be achieved by more self-reliant and independent methods. This new group came to be known as the Extremist Party in contrast to the older one, which began then to be referred as the Moderate Party. By the starting of the 20th century, Indian politics had come under the influence and domination of extremists. Though from the last few years of the 19th century, existence of extremists was being reflected on the horizon. But it was only after the partition of Bengal that they gained popularity. From 1905 onwards, the moderate leaders rapidly lost their influence over the Indian National Congress. Gradually, over the years, the trend of militant nationalism, also known as extremism, grew in the country. Extremism on the Indian national scene did not spring up all of a sudden. In the first decade of the 20th century, in fact, it had been growing slowly since the revolt of 1857, but was invisible. The nationalistic ideas behind the revolt of 1857, according to the extremists, were Swadharma and Swaraj. Now let's analyze the causes of extremism. First, the refusal to meet the political and economic demands by the government and its repressive measures against the growing national movement shook the faith of an increasing number of Indians in its ideology and the technique of liberal nationalism. Leadership of the moderates had failed to deliver any fruit to India, and so young nationalist leaders started to acquire dominant positions gradually. Second, the Act of 1892 dissatisfied the Congress leaders, so they chose to resort to legal and nationalistic policies for their demands. Third, now they recognized the true nature of the British rule, which moderates failed to, and had belief in it being just. Fourth, education gave them a new vision and they got inspiration from Indian history. Western thinkers also influenced them. Fifth, increasing westernization of India by British led them to think that they will destroy Indian customs and traditions and culture, so gradually they grew against the British. Sixth, Lord Curzon's reactionary policy was also responsible for the growth of extremism. He spoke derogatory of Indian character in general, which hurt the pride of the Indians. At the Calcutta University convocation, he said, undoubtedly, truth took a high part in the codes of the West before it had been similarly honored in the East. The Calcutta Corporation Act, the Officers' Secret Act, the Indian University Act of 1904 created great resentment in India. The Delhi Darbar, held in 1903, where India had not fully recovered from famine of 1899 and 1901, was interpreted as a pompous pageant to a starving population. 7. Much more was the dissatisfaction with the achievements of the moderates, which paved a way for extremist politics. Contemporary Indian influences. Abyssinia's repulsion of the Italian army in 1896 and Japan's victory over Russia in 1905 broke the spell of European invincibility. Nationalist movements in Egypt, Persia, Turkey, and Russia also influenced extremism. Also, humiliating treatment of Indians in British colonies like South Africa helped extremism. 10. The partition of Bengal was one of the most important reasons for the emergence of extremism. 11. Most of the limitations of moderates were the causes of the birth of extremism. Now let's analyze the goals of the extremists. First, the goal of the extremists was Swaraj, which different leaders interpreted differently. For Tilak, it meant Indian control over administration, but not a total severance with Great Britain. Bipin Chandra Pan, however, believed that no self-government was possible under British rule. For him, Swaraj was complete autonomy, absolute freedom for the British rule. Aurobindo Ghosh in Bengal also visualized Swaraj still meant self-rule within the parameters of British imperial structure. Now let's analyze the nature of extremism and its leaders. Extremists had a wide social base of political agitation. They involved lower middle classes apart from the educated middle class. They did not believe in the British rule. They got their inspiration from Indian history, culture, tradition, and heritage, and had faith in the masses' capacity to participate and sacrifice. They also adopted extra constitutional methods of boycott. Their demand was Swaraj as their birthright. The philosophy of political extremism was greatly influenced by the writing of Bankim Chandra and his spiritual nationalism. Attached to nationalism and Western ideals also alienated the moderates from the masses in India. That is why, in spite of their high idealism, they failed to create a solid base amongst the masses for their movement. Whereas the militant nationalism drew inspiration from India's past, evoked the great episodes in history of the Indian people, and tried to instill national pride and self-respect among the Indian people. They opposed idealizing the Western culture and considered it a cultural capitulation by the British rulers. The militant nationalist leaders emphasized that it would only bring about an inferiority complex amongst the Indians and repress their national pride. The militant nationalism revived the memories of the Vedic past of the Hindus, the great phase of the regimes of Ashoka and Chandragupta, the heroic deeds of Rana Pratap and Shivaji, the epic patriotism of Rani Lakshmibai. They propounded that Indian people were endowed with a special spiritual consciousness. Now let's assess the achievements of extremism. Advocates of extremism range from active revolutionaries at one end to secret sympathizers of revolutionaries to those who were opposed to all violent methods at the other end. Their goal of Swaraj also had different meanings. The extremists transformed patriotism from an academic pastime to service and suffering for the nation. Socially, they became revivalists. They were advocates of social reform in India. Tilak opposed the age of consent bill through reason. Tilak's cow protection policy, organization of Ganesh festival in 1893, projected him as the leaders of the Hindu autocracy. These factors divided Hindus and Muslims. They also got some success. For example, the partition of Bengal was annulled in 1911. Aims of Swaraj, though denied by Lord Morley, were no longer looked upon as a revolutionary demand.